And that's where the premise is broken, I think.
I get you.
You have to be able to clearly articulate your own problem, diagnose it,
Yeah.
and then have the energy and the wherewithal to seek the right help from the right place at the very time where you are least equipped to get out of bed, let alone make coherent decisions.
Yeah. So we're off to Surbiton to go and meet with James Pickles. He is an executive coach. He does talks with large companies, small companies about well-being in the workplace and in your personal lives. I'm really excited to have this conversation because it interests me. You know, there's been this trend towards focusing on mental health and well-being, but for me, it's part and parcel with being a leader. Learning how to support your team and also learning how to support yourself so that you're better able to support your team. So I'm really interested in this one, and I hope you enjoy the video. So, James Pickles, thank you for joining me. Well, I'm joining you. It's the allotment.
Yeah. You're in my allotment.
I'm in your place. Where are we?
We're in Surbiton, not so sunny Surbiton.
Grey and risky, potential rainy Surbiton, but we're in a beautiful place. It's an allotment. I haven't been to an allotment in years. It's beautiful. Guys, James is a executive coach, mental health and well-being advocate, known in our industry anyway by many. We'll get into a little bit, but what are we doing today here?
Today, Theo, we're going to populate some of these beds behind us with some seeds, but some of these things aren't ready to go in the ground just yet, so we're going to put them in pots first. And you are going to be my executive chief in charge of putting soil into pots.
Executive chief soil potman.
Must be, yeah.
Love it.
There's probably some sort of name for that. Anyway, that's what we need. So I'm going to ask you to simply dip our little compostable pot in here, tamp it down a little bit.
Right.
With your thumb, and you're going to prepare a whole bunch of these, and then we're going to stick some of this stuff in.
Okay.
Stripy marrows, normal courgettes, some peppers of various descriptions, and some butternut squash.
I want to make sure I get this right because I'm, believe it or not, a bit of a novice. Just like this centimetre space.
Yeah. Just so, firm but not crushed.
Not crushed, so gently pat it down. Okay, cool.
Consistency of a medium well steak.
Yeah, feels about right.
I just made that up.
All right, so James, tell me about yourself. How you got into the whole coaching, what you was doing before. I mean, I've checked out some of your stuff. I know that there was a big event that I guess was the catalyst for this, but tell me about it, your route into this work.
It was timely because it's the 29th of March today, and on the 28th of March 2019 at about 2 p.m, so 3 years ago in a day, was the time where I staggered is probably the right word, staggered away from my desk in the grip of what I later learned was an acute panic attack brought about from trying to endure increasing pressures at work, stress-related panic attack, and it got so bad by then that I took myself off because I got to the point where I couldn't read. Lost the power of reading. I could understand individual words, but I couldn't derive meaning from them. So I couldn't read my own notes or emails, or couldn't understand what was on my screens. And shortly after that, the extension of that was by 2 p.m. I'd lost the power of speech. So when people were coming over, seeing me distressed, because bloody frightening not being able to read suddenly, and they're going, "You okay?" And I'm trying to say, terribly British, trying to say, "Fine, thanks." Resolutely, clearly not fine, but I couldn't form the words, so I just gasped. It was like sort of gasping, whilst heart rate through the roof, shaking hands, low blood pressure, all that stuff. So I took myself home 3 years and a day ago.
Jesus.
I didn't know it then, but I never went back to that job or that desk. I was away.
What was the field? What was you doing?
I was working for Taluna at the time.
Yeah.
Many of your audience perhaps will know who they are, big in fieldwork online.
Yeah.
And I was a sales director, had been for 9 years at that point.
Yeah.
And I was running the team where we would offer our services to the end client directly. So all of our clients were Procter & Gamble, Coke,
Yeah.
Unilever, Sony, Hilton
brands.
Hotels, major brands.
Yeah, I think people don't realise. I saw a survey once that said that market research, one of the most stressful, or I wouldn't say one of the most stressful, but there's like, a lot of people struggle with mental health in market research. Because, the nature of what we do, tight timelines and all of that. But, I've never, so luckily I don't think I've ever had a full-blown panic attack. But from what I've seen from others, I've never heard of losing the ability to read and talk. That sounds like the extreme. I mean, that must have been crazy for you.
Yeah, scary times, right? But it was 10 days in the making. So that was the panic attack started at least a week before, right after MRS Impact. MRS friends who are not responsible for what happened that day.
We'll put a little disclaimer.
Yeah. I just happened to be. That's where I happened to be, and that was at the end of that whole the Q1 crazy trade show tour that you do. I'd gone all over Europe. I'd been at a whole bunch of shows.
Yeah.
And that was just the straw that broke the camel's back when Susan Vidler, who's still at Taluna, she doesn't mind that I use her name because I've asked her, so she'll be all right with this. Asked me how I was, and I started off by saying what we always say: "Oh, fine, thanks."
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah.
Fine, thanks. How are you? But I wasn't fine, and she could see it. She's high on EQ. She could see my behaviour was uncharacteristic for me. And she didn't do what most people do, which is accept "fine, thanks" at face value. She went words to the effect of, "Are you sure? Because you don't seem fine. Like, how are you really?"
Yeah.
Very rarely do people go in for another go and go, "How are you really though? Because, I'm seeing something here." And I ended up admitting to her and myself, "I'm not fine. This is too hard. Can't do it." And the admittance of that, I don't finish the sentence. Only got as far as F of fine. When actually, I'm not. Instead of saying fine, I just burst into tears instead. In that salubrious Weatherspoons round the corner from Tower Hill Hotel, in front of her, my boss, the head of Europe, a couple of senior guys in my team, and 150 other people that had just been at MRS Impact. So that's not where I would have chosen to begin sobbing and breaking down, but that's where it happened. And that was 10 days before. So 10 days later, as I'm sort of willfully ignoring increasingly obvious signs. They're obvious now, they weren't obvious then. I wasn't equipped to recognise what I was experiencing then. But looking back, it's pretty obvious. Trying to just double down, stiff up a lit, come on, put your act together, do a to-do list, all that, just doubling down on that. And 10 days later, my mind and body were like, "You're not listening, so we're just going to shut
it down." Wow. Man, it's intense. And I think the fact that you, because you did share. She asked and you shared it, and I think that was brave in itself, because I think a lot of people, one of the big things, they might go home and a bit of pillow crying, talking to the wife or whoever. "Oh, I'm stressed out," but to admit that to your colleagues and your peers in such an open way. I mean, yeah. So you had the break. How long were you off before you decided, actually, I'm not going back?
So two for the price of one in questions there. So how long was I off? So first of all, on that day 3 years ago, it took a few days, and I was talking to my wife, and the same thing happened again. "Oh, how was yesterday?" And I'm like, "Oh, funny thing happened yesterday. Susan asked if I was right," and I said I was, and she didn't believe me, and I was trying to tell it as an anecdote to my wife, Exactly the same thing happened again. I got as far as fine. As soon as I started to articulate, this is too hard, I can't do it anymore, I'm not fine, totally broke down again. And that would have been like Tuesday or Wednesday that week probably. So it took whatever the rest of the week was, however many days, can't remember. Took the weekend, and it was probably under my wife's direction actually, because I probably would have just tried to tough it out and go back to work. And I think it was probably her that went, go to the doctor.
Yeah.
Go to the doctor. You're obviously not all right. You did, and I reckon it took the doctor less than a minute of me as I presented, of saying, right, I think we'll sign you off work for a couple of weeks, starting now. And I was simultaneously relieved, but also embarrassed and ashamed and worried about it, and like it's really mixed emotions. Like on the one hand, thank goodness a professional is telling me I actually am legitimately ill and I shouldn't be at work. Oh, thank goodness for that. But also, I don't want to be ill.
Yeah.
I'm not happy with what's happening here. I want to be going back to work. Anyway, to answer your question, that was the first of a repeated series of getting signed off. So I'd get 2 weeks off, doctor would say, right, come back, see me in a couple of weeks, see how you're getting on. And so certainly for the next 4 or 5 visits, actually I was on a decline. So I was getting worse, not better. I hadn't even bottomed out.
Bloody hell.
So the doctor's like, sign off. And after a period of time, I'd recognised that doctor's notes alone weren't going to do it. Time off alone wasn't going to do it. I'm going to have to seek professional psychological support in the form of therapy. So I'd called helplines a few times and thought, once I got used to it, clues in the name, helplines are helpful. But it was really hard calls to make. Not because it's hard to call a number, it's not. It's quite easy. But it's really hard to admit that you should.
I want to talk to you about that because you've touched on it there about the feeling of embarrassment. Can you tell me a bit more like what you mean? Because I can relate to it kind of with guinea pig. When I'm going through struggle, I feel almost embarrassed to tell people, even family, because it's embarrassed and also this sort of feeling of guilt, like I'm going to put the stress onto them, going to, let them down, or they'll be worried that I'm going to let them down, so you just try and bottle it all up. Can you tell me a little bit more about how that was for you? Or what you...
There's a couple of things going on. So when you're describing that, I was immediately thinking of maybe why I hadn't spoken to my wife or my family, or like why hadn't I admitted it behind closed doors? Why couldn't I do that? I couldn't, didn't want to, and couldn't do it anyway, because I didn't want them to worry. And my, traditional situation, was like the breadwinner, right? And I wanted my wife and the kids to have the stuff that they want, and I wanted her to do whatever job she wanted in whatever manner it was, because she didn't have to worry about the money and all that stuff. Plus, I sound a bit conceited now, but my, let's say, brand or reputation, I had spent a long time growing into the successful version of me. Yeah. And there's a lot of behaviours attached to that. Yeah. And the characteristics that people expected and that I liked. And I liked being strong and reliable and resilient and unflappable and calm and being able to deliver no matter what. Yeah. Because I always had. But I'd sort of lost the point where that became my identity almost. Like I couldn't be anything but that. I was only allowed to be that. Because that's what I'd been for so long. And everyone was so pleased with it, me included. I was like, I like it when I'm those things. Yeah. They're not innately negative characteristics. The opposite, they're quite good. But I didn't know how to be anything except that.
And I think I guess you was, at least this is my interpretation relating it to my experience, you worried that if people see that other side of you, then it will negate in their eyes that other positive side. People are not going to be able to see that, it can be reliable and, great at these times, and then at other times be vulnerable and, you know, I won't say weak, but, you know, have that difference. At least, I don't know.
It felt like you could only be one side of a coin.
Yeah.
But being worried and vulnerable and occasionally insecure and not having all the answers all the time doesn't make you weak. Just makes you like everyone else.
Yeah.
Because everyone's like that, really.
Yeah.
But we're busily pretending that we're not, because we've somehow learned that that's what people respond to and that's what they want from you. But I've since learned that that isn't always true. Because you talked about being embarrassed, right? So why didn't I or couldn't I speak up earlier? Well, it's for fear of what might happen, which is not the same as what did happen. So this is like catastrophized, expected version of how I'll be responded to. If I show weakness, as I would have called it before, vulnerability, well, if I do that, they're going to think less of me. They're going to think, because I'm worried over here, I don't have all the answers, that means I am no longer confident or no longer an authoritative leader. But it isn't true. You can simultaneously be both, but you don't know that until you try it.
Yeah.
And there aren't terribly many examples available at work or in the media or in your immediate life, perhaps, where you've seen that happen. So what do? You follow the examples that you have seen, which is everyone. You know, I'm hearing my puffing my chest out as if that's a manifestation of that. Now, like the version of strength that you're used to seeing day in, day out, it probably starts at school. And with all the bosses I've ever had, pretty much.
You see that everywhere. You see that in... I think it's only recently now that, like, celebrities, for example, they have an episode or they do something, and, you know, the Twitterverse and all that starts to actually show some sort of empathy and say, oh, you know, it's consider this, consider that. But for as long as we can remember, perfection is what you put forward. And, you know, you just have to look at LinkedIn, look at our entire industry, and 99.9% of the people, they're the most infallible, professional, expert, so I think it's understandable to think that you're not going to now fit in with that crowd if you start showing some of your cracks and your imperfections, yeah?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree, but I would just add to that, I suppose, it depends where you're looking.
True.
Depends what examples you're... Actually, let's assume that you are looking like it's an active decision, which in the main it isn't, because you're just exposed to what you're exposed to, and because we've spent so long being locked down and not physically with people, the only thing we had left was what we saw on screens, be they tiny ones in our hands or 65 inches on the wall. But if you care to look, there are examples all over the place. Talk about sports people, like there's an F1 race this weekend, wasn't there? And then during the week this week, Toto Wolff, the principal of Mercedes, he goes, oh yeah, I've been in therapy my whole life. It's great. I struggle sometimes.
Wow.
And I think,
yeah,
pinnacle of sport,
yeah,
reputation that you've previously seen, and now he's saying, yeah, it's totally cool to have therapy. It's a great idea. We wouldn't have had that 2-3 years ago, I don't think.
Absolutely not.
But you have to. That doesn't necessarily pop up in your feed unless you have started to follow people that talk like that. So that's served to me on LinkedIn by virtue of the other people that I have followed since the last couple of years. So I wonder if they've always been there, but we just didn't know where to find them.
It's kind of like when you do a project on Mercedes-Benz and then you step outside and all you see is Mercedes-Benz. Yeah, you see what you think about. But I mean, I think that there's something about modern times where that is changing, and I think also something you said is him saying that he's always been in therapy, or he's been in therapy for a long time. I think maybe this is something that should really, you know, the perspective, it's like a doctor, you know, you go for a checkup, you don't just go when you're about to croak it, right? But how many of us don't? How many of us only go when there's something seriously wrong? Would you advocate for like treating it almost just like a checkup, like anything?
100%. Once I got into the rhythm of having some therapy and found one that worked for me, because there's many kinds of therapy and there's many kinds of therapists, and it's a kind of uniquely exposing. I want to say intimate, but maybe that's not the right word. But a deeply personal series of things that you're going to talk about, and to assume that the first therapist that you meet will be the one that you trust and get on with sufficiently to allow you to expose yourself in that way. Maybe that's a bit of kind of wishful thinking. So I've heard lots of people say, "Oh, I've tried therapy. It was awful. Didn't like it at all. It's terrible." All right, we don't always love every gym class you go to, or there's many things you don't always love. You don't love every restaurant you go to. You don't write off all restaurants universally because you didn't like the one that you went to last week. You got to shop around a little bit.
That's true.
So my therapist too, and I chose one that lived near me. I had options, and it was all through the EAP, assistance program through work. Which, by the way, I was very, very high confidence level. I was the first person at Taluna to ever use it. It was quite new in, right?
Wow.
3 weeks or something, or a month before. I was the first one to ever ring the number.
Wow.
I was the first one to ever use some of these things. And as part of during that period of my decline, something that I'm bloody pleased that I did, but I didn't plan it, it's just a thing that I did. So I was a team manager, and I thought, what do responsible managers do? They lead from the front, don't they? So I thought, that EAP, I should probably ring that, because I like to know how things work. And if my team asks me how it works, I want to know what the answer is, so I'm going to ring the number.
Yeah.
Interesting now, looking back, that I had to create a reason to do it that was for someone else in order to allow myself to do it. I had to create this scenario to make it okay. Because it wasn't okay for me to want it or need it.
What is that? Why do we do that?
Don't know, we do. Like, we're too... You mentioned the industry that we're in. And we're meant to be really bloody good at understanding human behaviour and attitudes and emotions, so why are we so utterly rubbish at asking ourselves what our own ones are? Funny how that works. But you just get used to giving all the time, and turning the lens back on yourself is not a habit.
Yeah.
Anywho, I did it, and thought, that's good, isn't it? I've called the number, and now I'm going to send an email to a bunch of people explaining how it works, because it's a process that I'm trying to articulate. But in so doing, told them why, and I was like, I'm finding it really hard at the moment. It's really stressful right now. So I've called the number. A little bit more detail, but not much. So if you want to have a chat about it, let me know. Click send. By then I had decided not only to send it to my own team, but to everyone in ops and marketing and finance, the whole UK office, and a bunch of people in Europe too that I've been training. Sent it to 132 people in the end.
Wow.
Click send. Had the worst sender's remorse. Just went, what have I done that for? Huge error.
It's like Jerry Maguire.
Ring it, come back email. Walked into my annual appraisal, which was exactly then. Walked in, my boss and boss's boss were like, "Hi James, how you doing?" And instead of going, "Fine thanks," I went, "I think I've just done something really stupid." And then immediately cried again for like the umpteenth time. They're like, "Oh dear, what's happening here? What have you done?" "I've just sent this stupid email. Like, who am I to bore everyone with my trivial problems?" So didn't have an appraisal meeting for that hour. We had an entirely different kind of chat. And the narrative in my head was, everyone's going to think you're a fool and a fraud and weak and stupid. And when I got back to my desk, I had 80 replies.
Wow.
And I know lots of people, but I don't usually get 80 replies to an email. So my mind went, see, there's the evidence of how stupid you've been. How dare you? But it was 80 people saying variations of, "Thank you, well done, that's brave." Some also telling a story about how hard they were finding it. Quite a few doing that, actually. And then a couple of people said, "Oh, I would like to have a chat." Paraphrasing, because if it's all right for you, it's all right for me.
That's amazing.
And at that point, that was totally misleading. Months later did I see the significance of that, because I was too busy about to go off work for 9 months. But exploring that later in therapy, I thought there's something in that, isn't there? If it's all right for me, like this guy's got a reputation for being calm, resilient, and tough and strong and da-da-da-da-da, but it needed me to admit it in order for everyone else to think that it was okay, because they are following the example that I set, which was never admit it, always pretend to be fine, always pretend to be tough.
Yeah.
So as leaders, what is our responsibility to our team?
Yeah.
It's myriad. Keep the lights on, have the right strategy, support them, provide the right materials, right environment, all the rest of it. But is it maybe too to occasionally admit that we're just as human as they are?
Yeah.
If not for ourselves, if we have to create a little story as to why we're allowed to do it, maybe they need to hear. Maybe they need to hear from us
Yeah.
that we're not perfect and not superhuman.
I think you're so spot on with that, and I've had like different advice from different people. Things like, because as a startup, everything is turmoil all the time, right? It's a roller coaster. You're up, you're down, you're up, you're down. And I've had people say, don't let anyone know when you're down. Don't let anyone know. The team's gonna get worried. The team's gonna, think, uh-oh, they're gonna be on read next week looking for jobs. Like, keep it all to yourself. But then I've had others say, no, share it. Let everyone know. Then you get that sort of sense of camaraderie, unity. And I've tried to do the second, and it's worked. I mean, luckily, we're not having too much turmoil anymore. But, I can definitely see how that leadership from a more human perspective, and less of this sort of like, oh, look at me, I'm the infallible, immortal champion, do as I say because I know what I'm talking about. It's just not empowering people, is it? And it's also not showing them something that they can then aspire to. Because if you're perfect, it's like if I look at Superman, I will never be Superman. I'm not from Krypton. But if I see a man who's like me being Superman, then I could say, well, if he can do it, maybe I can. So 100% agree. So is this then how you, I guess, transitioned into more of a coaching? Was this what inspired it, or was there more?
In part, right? So going back in time, so I've been off work for, 5 or 6 months or something. And I'd been exploring the idea of being able to go back to Ealing. That's where the offices were. And I'd realised after not that long a time, I'd developed a visceral, sort of pathological, actual fear of the entire postcode of Ealing.
Oh my God.
So the idea of going to Ealing would take me from feeling like calm and normal. If somebody said, oh, you've got to go to Ealing now, I'd be like, well, it'd make me retch.
Wow.
Got to go to Ealing, and my hands would shake, and I'd well up, and my heart rate would go crazy. I'd become physically afraid of Ealing. And the closer I got, the sicker I felt.
Wow.
Like when
It's
somebody...
a physical thing.
Physical, absolutely physical. If someone brings a chunk of kryptonite to Superman, he starts to feel ill. So Ealing had become my kryptonite.
Jesus.
So in the process of exploring why that was, because that's not cool. I don't want to be afraid of postcodes. The therapist is going, all right, well, we can explore maybe why that is. And she got me to realise that it wasn't about Ealing, but it was about the trauma that had happened there. So there's an epicentre, a ground zero that Ealing happened to be wrapped around. And she was like, okay, so we're going to do it in little chunks. So I spent a number of weeks plotting a route and plotting exit points. So I knew I could get out if I needed to. And having that safety net of knowing how I would get out helped me to take steps forward. But it took ages to be able to do it. So I remember once I managed to get to Ealing, not the office, that was still a mountain yet to climb, but I'm sat opposite going, months in. Meanwhile, my job's still open. They're still waiting for me to come back, and they're going, how you getting on? Not putting clear pressure on, but I'm starting to feel like they probably want to know, am I coming back or not? And I've begun to realise if I go back to work and do that job again, I'll probably die. A year before, 2018, I'd already had a massive episode the year before, which I again ignored and swept under the carpet. Collapsed in the boardroom, went to A&E. Thought I was having a heart attack. Didn't see that for what it was, pretended it was something else. So the 2019 thing was episode 2, not 1.
Wow.
I thought if I go back again, I'm not self-aware enough, I haven't learnt enough to be able to navigate the job in the way that I was doing it, in a way that won't lead me to A&E, except next time I might be dead.
Yeah.
Because I will have died on the boardroom floor, so I'm not going to do that job anymore because it'll kill me. It might sound melodramatic, but that's how I felt at the time. So I resigned. Seems like a sensible decision. Resign and also let Selena get on with replacing me. Entirely fair.
Yeah. I mean, it was very, I think, patient of them. Well, I would hope that companies out there are giving their teams that sort of time to recover, but it's I think it's quite rare.
Well, they paid my salary throughout. They kept telling me, take as much time as you need. Nevertheless, I don't want to do that forever.
Yeah, of course.
Anyway, skip forward because I'll ramble on all afternoon, and it's not.
We've only got so much film.
It's not the way. So I'm going to speed up a bit, right? So, what happens is I resign from that job, have actually a really severe identity crisis immediately afterwards. It's the right decision for the right reasons, but so much of my identity was wrapped up in the job that I did and the way that I did it, and I almost cast that aside with no thought to what would remain.
Yeah.
And it felt like what remained was about 5% of me, and it was the fairly broken bit.
Yeah.
I was like, what am I going to do now?
Yeah.
And if they stop paying me, I'll lose my house because I can't work anywhere else. No one else is going to tolerate the version of me that currently exists. So we're chatting through, do you want to leave? And I'm like, no, I don't. Although the better answer should have been, yes, I do. So we constructed a new role, and it was called Sales Acceleration Coach, using my 20 years of expertise in selling stuff, and I'm also reasonably good at articulating how it is that I've managed to sell things. And by that time I was already training the sales teams of most of Europe anyway, in the job that we were doing. So I'm like, oh, perfect.
Yeah, it's clever.
That's a sensible step, and actually it's quite good because I can be spread now across the broader business instead of just the corporate sector.
Yeah, and the pressure is less pressure on you to achieve results. It's more something that you can do, I imagine, anyway. You can do, which is more just about other people, gearing them up.
It was. I mean, there were still sort of objectives and KPIs and stuff. And in the end, it didn't really work out because I shouldn't have gone back to work when I did. I wasn't well enough. A bit like I showed you earlier, those seedlings that I put in too early that wilted. That was me.
Yeah.
I went in too early and the conditions weren't warm enough, so to speak, and I wilted and died in that role. But along the way, because I'd grown used to telling the truth about how I was, because I was doing it every week in therapy and with most other people that I meet, I was okay with telling people how I was when I went back to work, if they asked. And I'd say, look, how are you?
Yeah.
And they'd sit across from me, go, fine, thanks. And I'd see something in their eyes and go, paraphrasing, it wasn't quite so blunt, but I'd go, I don't believe you. I don't think you are fine. How are you really? Bearing in mind, as I later found out, that the title of Sales Acceleration Coach isn't maybe the best way to frame what I was there for, bearing in mind I was running the most successful team, fastest growing and most profitable in Europe, and I was perceived generally to be the best at it in Europe. And now here I am, popping up after a year in a brand new job to make you sell stuff better.
It's a bit of pressure actually for the mentee. It's quite a lot of pressure.
And they didn't volunteer for it.
Oh, God.
They were put on it by their boss, who wanted them to sell more stuff quicker. So all they heard was, they felt that it was step one of a redundancy process in disguise. That it was a PIP under a different name. So no wonder they were like,
I'm okay.
Bit scared. Yeah. But I discovered that if I went first, I'll tell you how I am, and I would just tell them, which at the time was quite bad still. Yeah. Really afraid and insecure. I don't know if this job's going to work. I don't know if I can help you. I don't think you even want to be here. I'm not sure if I want to be here. Awful. By the way, do you want to know anything about where I've been for the last year? And they'd be like, is that okay to ask that? I'm like, yeah, man, let's get amongst it. So I would show this vulnerability, which set the tone and gave them permission to do the same, so they would reciprocate. And invariably, people were sat in front of me because they did need a bit of support in hitting their targets for whatever reason, but it wasn't because they were rubbish or that they weren't dedicated or keen or had lack of desire. It was none of those things. There's a bunch of other stuff getting in the way of that, which invariably has nothing to do with work. Something else. And once I'd opened up, so could they. We could get all that stuff on the table. Quite often, it was stuff they'd never told any human ever.
Yeah.
I'd be the first person they'd ever told.
It might have been the first time they ever actually thought it through.
Or said it out loud.
Yeah.
And once all that was out of here and out here, it was a bit clearer. At the end of the hour, let's say we had an hour, I'd go, okay, so what's bothering you at work? And they'd tell me, and it'd be a bunch of stuff. Well, you don't do one thing at a time, so what's the one thing that's bothering you the most today? Oh, it's this thing. How are you going to do it? Oh, I don't know. Well, pretend that you do. Let's imagine that you do know. Well, like, where would you start? Don't worry about the total solution, but where would you start? What's step one? They would invariably know the answer, but it was so cluttered amongst the other stuff that was in here, they just needed help teasing it out. And I later learned that's what coaching is.
Yeah.
You don't tell them the answers, you just help them navigate around. It's like you carry their bags. It's like being I quite like metaphors, so it's a bit like being a Sherpa to some mountain climbers. Like, I'm not telling you where to climb or how hard to climb or how high to climb or anything, but I'm going to carry the stuff and I'm going to keep you safe.
Yeah.
So you can decide. I started doing that, really liked it. This is great. But it didn't fulfil the KPIs that I'd agreed to, which was to make people sell more stuff quicker.
Really?
It's quite difficult to draw a causal line between these rambling chats.
Did you notice, like, because obviously you're tracking all of these metrics, did you see any difference?
Yeah, but it wasn't in a week.
Yeah.
Right? It would take longer than that.
Yeah.
But they'd invariably come back and go, hey, how'd that thing go? And they'd go, so much amazing, so much better than I thought. In fact, this outcome happened and that, which I hadn't even anticipated. Thanks so much for your advice. And I'd be like, I didn't give you any. Because I didn't, most of the time.
Yeah.
Because that's not what coaching is. So I loved that. And then COVID was invented, lockdowns, furlough. I was on a phased return, which wasn't going terribly swimmingly because phased returns don't. It's not a straight line. Nobody told me that. The line looks like that.
Yeah.
Redundancy followed, which was a good idea. Like, I didn't have the courage to leave by myself.
Yeah.
Needed some help leaving.
Needed that nudge.
So I understood it. And I even agreed with it. But as it turns out, that has no bearing on how painful it is to be made redundant with somewhere you've given 10 years to. So that was a bit of a blip.
I think the whole term redundant is like a bit a pill to swallow.
Yeah.
You know?
We don't need you anymore.
Yeah.
Off you pop.
Useless. It's almost, you know.
Yeah, we don't need you. And let's not go down that wormhole particularly, but it was a good thing. But I had to go back to therapy to unpick it.
Yeah.
So for a while I hadn't been going to therapy, and I thought, I can't do this by myself. I can't understand this by myself, but I know someone that can help me out, so I'll go back. This time I wasn't in crisis, I wasn't burned out, I wasn't having panic attacks. It was just like, I don't really know how to unpick this by myself, and my wife is not trained at it. It's unfair of me to try and put her in that position.
Yeah.
And that's what we do with friends and family. I hear it so often. Oh, I've got a really good support network. Oh, really? Who's that? Oh, my friends and family.
Yeah.
Are any of them trained therapists?
No.
So they bring massive bias to the table.
Yeah.
And they're not trained. So maybe talk openly to friends and family, but if you need real help with some stuff that might involve those friends and family,
get an expert.
Find a professional.
It's true. People, it's like if your computer breaks, you're not just gonna say to unless your mate is really great at computers, hey, fix this, or your washing machine breaks down or something, speak to the next door neighbour. You get a plumber, you get a professional,
Yeah, professional. Anyway, went back, explain all this stuff, and therapist goes, you love coaching, I can see that you do, so every time you talk about it you light up. Every time you talk about everything else you shrink down. So why don't you go learn more about coaching? I respond, of course, with vast imposter syndrome and go, don't be ridiculous, who am I to coach? I'm still, quite broken. Sure, I didn't say that. I said go and learn about it. I was like, oh right, that's different, entirely different proposition, except it isn't.
Yeah.
But she gave me an out again. You don't have to be it.
Just go and learn.
Just go and learn it. It's like, okay, so I did, retrained, got qualification, part of the things that we learned, or one of the things that really stuck with me, was the principle of being 80% ready. And I really like Matthew Syed books, and there's a few. Black Box Thinking's a really good one.
Is that the 80-20 rule?
Yeah, right.
But what's 80% ready? Because that's slightly different to my understanding of the 80-20.
Well, there's Pareto's law, and there's other ways of the 80-20. But what I mean by being 80% ready is, so if I say to you, are you ready to be an entrepreneur? Are you ready to launch Guinea Pig? At what point did you go, I am totally 100% unequivocally
Never.
ready? But you wait for the point that you are, kind of. So like, I'll just do one more thing, then I'll feel ready.
Well, most people do.
But as it turns out, confidence follows action, not the other way around. And I'd always been waiting to feel confident before I took action.
Yes.
And I'd be covering up some of that stuff and pretending, fake it till you make it. Took me quite a long way. But when it came to this, I was like, I'll never feel ready to be a coach. And they went, so what?
Yeah.
No one's ready. No one's ever really ready, are they? So what if you just put it out there and said that you're a coach? I'm like, I couldn't do that. Why not? Because someone might want to be coached by me, and I'll be rubbish.
And then I'll let them down, and then they'll tell everyone, and all of a sudden,
it'd be a nightmare. And they were like, yeah, but you can not do it. You can decide to be a coach. You can tell everyone that you're now a coach. People can come to you and say, please come be coached by you. All the way up to that, you can say no.
True.
And you could start coaching and then go, this isn't working for us, so I think we'll gracefully withdraw. You could do that at any point. But if you wait until you're ready, you won't even get to that.
No, I agree.
And it's like minimal viable product. So, in tech, that's the thing, isn't it? If you're going to launch IT or a web-based product, you don't launch the perfect version at the end, because you don't get to that until you've launched.
Well, you'll never launch.
So that's how I got to coaching. I'd only done one module.
Yeah.
And we did that in module 1. So I went, well, I might as well tell LinkedIn that I'm a coach now. So I did. And loads of people went, you'll be great at that, lovely. And a few people went, oh, I'd love to have a chat. And a couple of them went, after we'd had they're like, okay, great, so how much? And I was like, an amount. And they went, great, sounds good. When do we start? And I'm like, I am now actually genuinely a coach. Someone's just paid me for it. And that was, 13 months ago? No, not long that. It would have been 14 or 15 months ago. So I'm like, oh, I'm a coach now, clearly.
Yeah.
And I'll just try and be good at it. And I'll make some mistakes and I'll learn from them.
Yeah, but you grow into it, and you grow in confidence as you keep on succeeding or failing, but learning from failures, as you said. So what's life like now? More than a year into it, how many talks have you given? What's the largest? I'm just gonna fire a whole bunch of questions, but what's the journey been like now since launching?
Well, 14, 15 months ago, I thought I'll be a coach, and that's all that I'll do. But as I grew used to explaining how I'd got to that point and what had happened with the burnout and all the rest of it, telling a whole bunch of former clients who were going, hey, how are you? I heard you had a rough time. That's awful. And I went for went for walks with people. I'm just explaining it. And as I got more used to telling the story, people kept saying, it's really unusual for someone that looks like you to talk like that, to just say it how it was and say it how it is.
What do they mean by look like you?
I think they meant how I used to look like.
Like
this
Clark
version.
Kent.
Yeah. I don't know. They're probably thinking, but I remember you from before, and you were like this sales director guy, polished, and you never let anything showed any cracks, any of that stuff. It's not often that we see, because you still look like you, but now we're seeing you talk about being afraid and vulnerable and crying all the time.
Yeah.
It would be quite powerful if you could come and tell that story to my team, because I suspect quite a few people in the team are also pretending to be fine when they're not.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, sure, I'll go do that. So did a few. And so I just said sort of whimsically, oh, we'll do a Q&A, it'll be fine, thinking it would be about the talk. To discover it's not about the talk. Talk's just a scene setter, it's just for context. It's just to create the environment. And then when we got to the Q&A, because I'd done it, and I don't know, I've done 22 or 23 talks, 23 organisations of various sizes. One of them was Confirm It Forster, whatever they're called now, Focus Vision or something.
Yeah. It's Forster now, no?
Forster, and it was all on Zoom still in lockdown, and that was if everybody had dialed in, it would have been 2,000 people. In my little, not from here, not from this office, but from my
From the
office at home. But it was about 180 people dialed in that day across 3 time zones.
Wow.
And that, like so many other talks since, I get to really sticky bits of, and I'm reliving it, right? I'm going back there, and it still hurts. So
Is it a sort of therapy though?
Yes, cathartic. I understand it better, but I usually cry during it. So there'll be a painful bit, and I'll be like, "Here it comes," and some tears will come out. And I'm like, "Well, I knew that would happen.
Yeah,
that's fine. Better out than in."
Yeah.
So I sort of fell into that, and as it turns out, I do lots of coaching, but it's usually after a talk. Because somebody's sat there, some bits of it have resonated for whatever reason. They've come to realise maybe they're not as fine as they're pretending to be, but they don't know how to let it out.
Yeah.
Or they don't know how to tell someone.
Yeah.
They don't know what the steps would be. And to, a point from before, scared, confused. What if I do it? What if I do speak up? Does that mean my career is finished? And all these fears are very common.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say, because I think in some organisations they're also justified. It's like I've been in certain situations. I won't say any names or anything, but you sort of show a crack, and people then start questioning everything else that you're doing. So I can understand why someone might want. I mean, do you get many people after your talks coming to you privately and saying, "Hey, can I ask you about this, that, and the third?"
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, all the time. And I realised that that's quite difficult to do. So I had to find a way of lowering those barriers. So I used to say, "Hey, if you've got any questions after the talk, get in touch." And a couple of people would. But every now and again, I'd get. Interesting, I wouldn't get questions straight away. I'd get
stories.
I'd get an email, I remember a couple of them, and they'll start with an apology, they'll finish with an apology, and there'll be a stream of consciousness in the middle. "Hi James, I heard your talk, it was impactful. Sorry to take up your time, sorry to bother you with..." Then they'll trivialise what they're thinking, like it doesn't have legitimacy. Then there'll be just like an outpouring of stuff, sometimes without any punctuation. It's like one giant sentence. Because once they've started, it just pours out of them, and at the end they'll apologise again. There isn't even a question till the next email. Like, oh, that's interesting. So for me to sort of solicit questions from people is to suppose that they understand themselves well enough to have any in that moment. But what if they've never considered really how they are? They've got a tiny little window to try and turn that into a coherent question in front of a bunch of people.
Yeah, it's impossible.
So no wonder they just park that.
Yeah.
I haven't got one. So I try really hard now to, if you've got a question, ask it. But actually what I'd really love to do is hear from you on what, if anything, the experience of the talk has brought up for you. How do you feel about it? What did you notice? To try and get them to reflect, because that's the beginning, and after that may come questions, which very often are, how do I speak up?
Yeah.
How do I access help? Which is interesting for those organisations that have got vast amounts of help available. They've spent thousands or hundreds of thousands sometimes on provision and wellbeing initiatives. Like it's, as far as the wellbeing team or the HR team are concerned, it's pouring out of their ears, like it's everywhere, it's ubiquitous.
Covered, yeah.
How come it's impossible that employees don't know it's there, and yet people call me up and go, I don't know how to access help. So there's a disconnect.
There is a disconnect. Do you think, are they saying they don't know where to access help outside of the work provided help? Like they don't want to use the work's provided help, or that they didn't even know that the company provided it?
Both, all of those things.
Really?
So imagine you've gone for a swim. Perhaps you've taken the guinea pig team swimming. I mean, that would be maybe a bit weird, but you could. Let's say you've gone to the beach for the day, and you've gone, hey everyone, let's all go for a lovely swim. The conditions are great. but then the tide changes, the weather conditions change, and suddenly you're swimming, but now you're tired, and you're caught in a riptide now, and no one knows how to navigate a riptide. But you, as a provider, have gone, well, don't worry about it. If you start drowning, just swim to the shore.
Yeah.
I'm a bit busy drowning.
Yeah.
And that's where the premise is broken, I think.
I get you.
You have to be able to clearly articulate your own problem, diagnose it,
Yeah.
and then have the energy and the wherewithal to seek the right help from the right place at the very time where you are least equipped to get out of bed, let alone make coherent decisions.
Yeah.
So that's where this all falls down. It might exist, it might be plentiful, it might be signposted left and right, but when you're in that position, you don't need signposts, you need somebody to swim up next to you and go, don't worry, it'll be okay, I'll guide you there.
Yeah.
Where do you need to go? I'll help, I'm with you.
Yeah.
That's what you need.
You've sparked something in my mind, because, even as a startup, we've tried to, have all of these, healthcare, dental, this, that, the third. But if someone came to me tomorrow and said, I need to access some of these things, how do I do it? I would say, oh, Sarah, I don't know how it works. And really, as a leader, I should be able to be that person, as you said, to guide them towards it.
Well, to know where it is. Like, it's really hard for someone to be brave enough to go to themselves first, I'm not okay. Following that, to go to a colleague or a boss and go, I'm not okay. You've got a window. A window of opportunity to help them, and it's fleeting. So if you can't help them in that moment, there is no guarantee that they'll have the courage to come back.
Yeah.
So if you send them off, go see some. This isn't a criticism of you, by the way.
No. I think most people who run businesses are probably in the same bucket, because we're doing all the important stuff, right?
So what I'd love to see is all employees knowing where it lives. The other thing is, you only read emails that are relevant to you at the time, and if you're not feeling awful, why would you read in depth the email that contains all of the signposting for the EAP? You don't. You park it in a folder somewhere, then you forget where the folder is. But the other thing I'd love to see, right back to what we were talking about before, when should you use help? I'm like, constantly use help. Help's helpful. Support is helpful.
Yeah.
And what I'd love for leaders to do is recognise that help's helpful for them, just as it is for everybody else, and that their whole team are looking to them for an example to follow. So if you want your team to access the stuff that you've paid good money for, maybe the thing that you should do to best help them access it is show them how you do it.
Fire. That's I really have taken that. That just hit me in the chest, because I'm the worst for that. I'm like, you guys, I want to make sure everyone's got what they need. Don't worry about me here killing myself. Doesn't matter. You just do it. And shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. You lead by example. You wouldn't do that with your kids. Not that.
No.
Not
Well,
that
unfortunately, we do. We do.
You're not the metaphor.
Yeah. Well, listen, I do get it right and wrong with my kids all the time. But when I remember that they will occasionally do what I say, but they'll largely do what I do.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to have to show them what I do. Like, I can't tell my daughter, who's 14, coming on 24, that it's not okay for her to have her phone in a room and be with her friends all night if I have my phone in my room.
Yeah.
Like, if it's a rule for me, it's a rule for her, and vice versa.
Yeah.
We've got to live this stuff, not just talk about it.
It's true. It's true. Not just do as I say, not as I do type thing. Doesn't work.
Ideally, do as I say and what I do.
Yeah.
And just try and join those things closer together. I'm not suggesting that all leaders at all times should constantly wear their hearts on their sleeves and be worried, because like you were saying before, you're there to provide stability and confidence and a strategy and equipment and an environment. But not every second of every day.
Yeah.
If you want people to trust you, which is an inherent part, I think, of success and teamwork, trust, the foundation of trust is openness and honesty, I think. And if you're never open and never honest, why should they trust you?
Yeah.
And why should they open up to you if you never open up to them? That's not reciprocal, meaningful relationship. That's like parent-child.
It's true. It is true. Even parent-child. If you are more open with your kids, then they might be more open with you when they're having that problem with that kid in school or something. And or whatever, you know, if you've created, I think it's with a parent and child relationship but maybe it's kind of similar with a employer-employee. There's like, you want to get as close to friends as you can without crossing over that boundary and then like losing that respect as well. But yeah, there's quite a lot of similarities.
It's tough to navigate. This stuff's tough.
What would you say, so I mean, advice for leaders, you know, you've given a big one there, which is, you know, walk it, don't just talk it. You know, if you want to provide support, show them how by doing it yourself. But what else would you say in terms of owners of small businesses, large businesses, particularly because I think many struggle with coping with sort of the pace and the pressure, and as sort of like showing the team, if you're struggling to keep steady, then everyone feels unsteady. You know, what would be your advice, your approach?
A couple of things, I guess. Like, firstly, people are smart and they observe. So they know, they'll know if things are unsteady, and you pretending that they're not isn't really going to help.
Yeah.
Like, they can tell the difference.
Yeah.
I got asked a question once. I won't tell you who the client was, it'd be inappropriate, but somebody said, what would be my advice in dealing with toxic positivity? What's that?
Yeah.
I hear myself say back then, toxic positivity. So that's my interpretation of that. That is a state where the only thing you're allowed to be at work is positive. That's the only acceptable response to something, because the boss is only ever relentlessly positive.
Right. Yeah.
So that it becomes toxic. I can only, if that's what he or she is displaying all the time and nothing else is allowed.
That makes sense.
How can I ever be anything but that? Which means
Yeah.
I can never display or tell the truth about it because the leader isn't.
That
Toxic
makes a lot of
positivity.
sense.
Okay, I'm not advocating that we always tell each other the whole truth. Every time somebody goes, "How are you?" you go, "Well, glad you asked. Roll up your sleeves." Here we go. 90 minutes later, because there are such things as boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can't force people to talk to you if they don't want to, nor should they force you to listen if you're not ready. It's totally okay, I think, to say, okay, it feels like something important needs to happen or a conversation needs to happen here. Right now's not the time, because in order to give it a full attention and to bring my full self to it, I need to deal with this and this and this. So can we do it at this time?
Mm-hmm.
That's okay, you can schedule that. But for leaders, you don't want to outpour every insecurity every moment to your team, but it's got to go somewhere.
Yeah.
You just lock that stuff in forever, builds up like a pressure cooker. So I'd be saying, nurture your support network. Firstly, have one.
Yeah.
Have a support network. I mean, as we know, you and I, because we were chatting before, we're going to go to Market Research Club on Thursday. In it will be a whole load of peers
Yeah.
that I don't report to and they don't report to me. So I'm going to pick and choose, not everyone, but for example, if Bob goes, "How you doing, James?" I'll probably tell him the truth.
Yeah.
And if someone that I know less well says, "How you doing?" I'll probably go, "Oh yeah, good, thanks. It's, it's an interesting time, a bit of turbulence, but I think I'm feeling my way through." Insert stock COVID answer here. But I'm going to choose.
Yeah.
I'm going to make sure that I have had an opportunity to express how I am. So I'd say to leaders, who would you do that to?
Your mentors, your support network, as you said.
Have a support network and realise that, sporting metaphor, if you're a football man, suspect you are.
A little bit. Arsenal.
Okay, so I don't know anything about football, but I do know that they have an extensive support network behind the players.
Oh yeah.
There isn't just one.
Oh yeah.
There'll be physios and sports and nutrition. They've probably got sports psychologists. They've got a whole bunch of people. You don't always go to a physio if you've got a confidence problem.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a leader, what does my support network look like? And is it diverse? Because I don't always need the same type of support every single day.
Yeah.
But I suspect what we do is beam all of our needs on a really tiny amount of people who probably aren't professional at it, who are probably our friends and family or sometimes our staff.
Yeah.
So where's that going? So
I see you. I see. It's having that dream team around you, whether they're in your team or the extended team, you'd have the right person for the right job.
Toolbox. You got a box
Yeah.
of tools. You don't know what tool you're going to need.
Yeah.
Like I'll go to therapy this year, definitely. Not
Mm.
because I need to, not because I'm in distress, because I quite like an MOT.
Yeah. I think that's a big one, especially for me, because, I mean, I haven't been to the GP in 15 years. Like, I'm just that type of person. Just, I'll be fine. And I think many look at physical health and mental health, they're different, right? Physical, that's life-threatening. Mental, I can sort that out myself. I'll watch a YouTube video, and it's not, it's really not. So I think that's one I'm going to take on board, that sort of mental health support therapy. It's not just for crisis, it's for maintenance, prevention better than cure.
Well, think of it like a car.
Mm.
Clumsy, go with me. Your car's there's a bunch of components to your car, one of them's the engine. You can option A, drive it till your engine explodes, and then try and make a mechanic fix it,
Yeah,
which would be a costly business.
yeah,
Option B, MOT it every year.
yeah. Yeah, when you say it like that, it's pretty obvious.
I'm full of obvious statements, which doesn't mean that I can always take them for myself. And that's where my support network comes in. I can't always notice by myself how well I am or not well. So I need the occasional, how are you really? And every so often I'm like, actually, since you mention it, I have had a bit of a rough time.
Yeah,
So it needs to come from within and without.
yeah,
That's where the diverse support network can help you with that stuff, because they won't take you at face value.
yeah. I think also there's a bit of a discipline in this, because I know for me personally, I don't know if it's a stereotypical male thing, but when I go through crisis, I go to my cave. I don't want to talk to anyone. I don't want to.
Where do you think you're sat?
This is the cave, But I've got friends who are trying to get in touch with me, and I can imagine if I had this big circle, although I know that they're there for these times, it might be difficult to actually reach out, because I just, hiding away. So I guess, as well as creating this network, it's also the discipline to keep up with them and keep up with it all in general. And that's I guess discipline is in everything, but I can imagine that's a struggle for some.
Struggle for everyone. There's a lot to distract you from these things. It's really easy to prioritise work over other stuff, because there's always a deadline, there's always some pressure. You've got people that rely on you.
Yeah.
It's really easy to fall down that and go, it's more important for me to answer one more email than it is for me to eat something proper
Yeah.
or to go for a walk. Because I look at all this massive list of emails that I've got.
Yeah.
So I'll just quickly... You're never going to have less emails. They're always going to be there. The world will still turn if you're not at the helm of the good ship Guinea Pig for 30 minutes to get some fresh air and a drink.
It's a struggle though, and I think more so maybe, I don't know, I've never been in like large corporate organizations, so I don't know what the pressure is when you're like a top C-level person in a big organization, and I can imagine that there's tons of pressure there it's a rat race, you're trying to fight to stay on top and keep your position. But for the other side of that, for someone like me, where you're a startup, there's this pressure of almost like survival, and it's like, I don't know, if I was dropped in a jungle with just a spear and a bottle of water and there's predators all around me, I don't think I could have the sort of feeling like, let me just take a little break right now and relax. I'm like on edge, and I think that is something that most people who are in that position, or I'd imagine anyway, who are trying to start something, that's how you hear about obsession, and you hear about people like developing sort of mental health issues, where eventually then, it could result in something like what happened to yourself. And I don't know, it's difficult to, because everyone can advocate for, this is what you should do, this is what you should do, this is the right way to do it. It's difficult for me. Like, we do a few meditation classes and stuff like that with my sister, and I know that these are the right things to do. I struggle. really struggle with just like, no, I'd rather just,
Yeah. Well, you mentioned discipline, that's part of it.
yeah,
But part of it, I think, is awareness and recognition of what the organism that as a human body requires.
yeah,
But it's a resilient device. You can push on really for ages.
yeah,
For ages, and you can still function to a point, but you get diminishing return on that.
yeah,
So, can you forever pour? Can you pour from an empty cup? No, you can't. You'll pour. At some point, you just got to refill it.
It's
Whether
true.
you like it or not, you're going to have to stop and refill it if you
That's
want to
true.
keep pouring. So people often ask me if I could turn back time, what advice would I give my former self to avoid burnout and all the rest? And I think actually, probably none, because I wasn't listening. I've got loads of advice that I could offer that younger self, but that younger self didn't know he had a problem,
yeah,
wasn't interested in facing that he had a problem that he didn't think he had, and everything was going fine. So
Yeah.
what advice would I give? So advice isn't the thing that would work, but questions might have worked if I'd had a mentor, or if I'd had a coach actually.
yeah,
I think I can't imagine, or I could if I really had to do that, but how many annual appraisals I've had in which we all filled in reluctantly a bit of paper that HR had given us, and we filled it in 20 minutes before the meeting and went, oh, some bureaucratic process, I'm going to tick a load of stuff, and we're all going to agree that I'm going to do exactly what I did last time but for 20% higher target. That's what my appraisals look like. But if I'd had a coach as part of that, let's say a couple of months before, right, James, we're going to give you a coach, business is going to pay for it, it's not employee of the business, it's an independent person, and that coach could ask me questions about the pace that I was working at.
what sort of questions? Just,
What sort of pace are you working at the moment? What's a typical day look like for you? What's a typical week look like for you?
yeah,
How do you feel about the pace that you're working at? When do you take time to look after yourself in your typical day? When does the thinking happen between your back-to-back meetings, especially in the last 2 years? When do you think? When do you actually do the work between the meetings? And amongst all of that, at what points do you take care of your physical and emotional needs? I wouldn't frame it like that, but just as a shortcut for the purposes of this. I'd ask myself to really explore what my day looked like and how sustainable did I think it was, that pace that I was working at. Is it deliberate? Am I doing it on purpose, or have I just fallen into it? So I'd ask myself to explore those things, and I wouldn't let myself off the hook as I trotted out such nonsense as because that's the pace that I need to work at. And I'd be like, says who?
yeah,
Is it boss saying that, or are you saying that?
yeah,
And so on, and so on. And I try and get myself to realise that it is okay to occasionally think, it's okay to exercise and move, especially, well, I'm 48 now, so it's even more important to exercise and move now. I'd ask myself how often I was drinking by myself, and whether I was drinking because I'm a social guy that likes to drink, or because
Yeah.
I was self-medicating to get through some things.
yeah,
There's a lot of questions I could ask my former self, but advice wouldn't cut it. I'd have to get to those
I think you're
those
spot on.
realizations by myself. But
Yeah.
with my Sherpa, with my support crew
coaching.
carrying the bag.
No, that was profound actually. You've really got me thinking. And there's one thing that you said about, is it on purpose or is it happening to you? You know, I think that's actually very interesting, because I think that a lot of this pressure that people put on themselves, they do it to themselves on purpose, because it's like they're under this mindset that, oh, if I just, kill it, then I'm gonna be way ahead of everybody else, or I don't know, maybe it's upbringing, maybe they saw a parent doing that to themselves and, figure that's what hard work looks like.
It's
I
probably
think
learned behaviour.
Yeah.
It's probably an example that they're following, whether they know it or not. I had a chat with a person a couple of weeks ago. I'd gone to do a tour, and they're walking me out. Oh, I'll go with you, I'll walk you to your car. Oh, that's courteous. As soon as we got out the building, she's like, right, now it's just you and me. Tears come straight away. She's like, oh, I just can't. It's insane. I'm like, oh, right, tell me about that. I'm working mega hard. Why is that? Because I'm going for a promotion. Okay. So talk me through it. what does really hard mean for you? Like, she's working all hours, this person, all hours, because you've got to step up, got to prove yourself, got to do this, got to do that to get the promotion. It's like, right. So once you've got the promotion that you're working extra hard to get, how hard are you going to work once you've got it?
Even harder, because I've got to keep it.
Okay. So option A, carry on working at an insane pace in order to get to an objective. Option B, get to objective and then reduce your hours by 50%. Oh, I couldn't do that. Why not? Because they'll notice. Right, so the only way you can get the job is to work at an unsustainable pace in order to prove that you can work at a pace that you know that you can't. It's like the premise is broken.
Yeah.
Like, if you can't get the job by doing a reasonable amount of work in a reasonable amount of time for any human that's safe, maybe that's not the job for you.
It's true. It's true. When you put it like that, it's true. Like, doubling down. Unless...
Oh, I just need to get to.
Yeah.
I live my whole life in the future. It was all about that. Happiness and satisfaction lives when I hit that target, which always got bigger. And the next, and the next, and the next. So I sort of forgot to enjoy the moment. I was always thinking happiness would arrive later.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think like that now. At least I try not to. And it has to be, I have to deliberate back to discipline. I have to I need reminders, I need prompts. The more tired I am, the more likely I am to slip back into that. I had a 20-year habit of thinking in a certain way. It's quite hard to unpick that and relearn it.
What are some of the practices, I mean, other than the gardening, what are some of the practices that you practice to stay in the moment and cultivate that sort of happiness, you know, that whistle while you work because I'm having a good time?
There's a few things. So, and I think my phone's in my pocket, but so I used to have all the apps on the phone. I'd have all my emails on there. I'd have notifications on, connected. I've got a smartwatch here, so it would buzz, so I didn't miss anything. What am I missing exactly? It wasn't healthy for me, so I had taught myself that it was okay to be contactable all the time, to reply to stuff as soon as it came in, no matter what, because that's some sort of virtue apparently. Not least the rotten example that set to my team. Especially now, like, there's a lot of turbulence in the world. The last 2 years has been exhausting with uncertainty. And now we've got some crazy guy with nuclear capability. Do I need that thrust into my phone and into my face every second? No, I don't. What can I do about that? Turn my notifications off. Make it a choice. Choose to consume news. Choose when I'm going to open my emails. Don't let the emails choose the time for me, going ping, and me going, oh, I must, because I'm so important. If I don't read this email right now, the world's going to stop. No, it isn't.
There was, I'm trying to remember who it was, like Joanna Lumley, I think. She was like, when I hear that ping, it reminds me of like the bell, when a servant, like, ding, 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 come now. You know, not a servant to it.
But I was.
Yeah.
My diary, I'd call it my diary, but I didn't own it. My diary owned me, and I'd let that happen by giving access to my diary to people. So what would they do? They'd drop stuff in. They'd look for gaps and they'd fill them. So what do I do now? Don't let people drop stuff in. Actually, that's a lie. I do. I use Calendly, so things can pop into my diary, but I set rules within it. So I can't have back-to-back meetings. My diary won't let it happen because there are rules, but then I have to set some rules as well, because I know I need a gap. I know I need to go for a walk. I know I need to eat. I know I need to drink. That going too far down this biological imperative route. I also need to do other stuff that bodies need. But to only give yourself 60 seconds to fulfill those between a back-to-back day, when you say it out loud, ridiculous.
And the thing is, it doesn't actually, at least in my experience, you say that that's what you're going to do, but in the end, you actually don't.
Discipline.
Because
We're back to discipline.
I end up like trying to, I'm going to slog it. And then for about 45 minutes, I'm just there like, daydream, because it needs to switch off, you know?
So that's it. Yes. Well, listen, we could talk all day about this stuff. So clearly, if daydreaming's happening, something's gone on there, probably you've just run out of capacity for a while. So you need to tune out, but it's not happening at a time of your choosing, it's happening by itself. Usually there's a bit of, for me, I'm not talking about you, but for me, then I'd feel guilty about it. So what if I just slotted it in on purpose and went, I know myself, I can't do, well, especially now, I used to be able to sit through like 2-hour meetings and I can do very short time now, unless I'm waffling on about this topic, in which case I can do it for many hours. But if I'm doing heavy lifting, intellectual or emotional heavy lifting with a talk or anything, I'm knackered afterwards.
Yeah.
Knackered. And I just have to own the fact that that's true.
It's
So
a
I put
different
gap
kind of
in.
tired, isn't it? It's like, I was trying to explain it to the missus actually. It's like the tired of lifting heavy things and your body's knackered, and then there's the tired of your brain is exhausted, and it's different, very, very different feeling.
So you need to recover. So I now try and put in time to prepare, time to do the stuff, time to recover. Don't always fulfill it, but if I'm choosing to fill a space that I have allocated for eating, drinking, thinking, resting, whatever, I try and make it deliberate.
Yeah.
Not, I've got gaps, I'll fill it.
Yeah.
Pause long enough to go. Just because I can do something doesn't mean I should. And sometimes the answer is no.
So that's another one I'm going to take, hot take the recovery time. It's like going to a gym, right? You know, you lift, you recover, you let them heal, you go back, you lift more. Obviously, as you can see. That makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. All right, to save this from becoming like a 7-episode documentary, let's tell the people at home, do you do individual courses? How can people, I mean, what sort of services or categories? Obviously there's the talks, there's the one-on-one. Talk us through, you know, what you have for people that they can reach out to you and what's on offer. I just longest winded way to say.
Well, one answer is go on to the internet and type James Pickles.
I've heard of that thing, the internet.
Yeah, it's a thing. James Pickles Coaching.co.uk, and on that it will tell you a few of the things that I do. But if I'm to really simplify it, I mainly will deliver talks either on the experience of how I burned out, how I got there, why it happened, what that looks like, what it feels like, to better equip people to have a moment where asking questions about that gnarly topic is totally okay. Yes, I tell a story, but mostly it's to create a safe space in which people do and can ask any questions they want.
Yeah.
Largely to just prove that you can in safety. And for a lot of people, it's the first step for them actually stopping long enough to ask and answer truthfully, how are you?
Yeah.
Really? You don't always need to take action, but it's really worth knowing the answer. So I do some talks on that. There's some other follow-up talks that I do now about the cost of yes. If you've met people that say yes all the time to everything, yes, and sometimes the answer should be no.
Yeah.
Or
no
not
is
now.
powerful. No is very powerful.
But knowing you should do it and knowing how and when to do it are two different things. So I'll do talks on that, or I'll do coaching. So often it is with people who are experiencing burnout, recovering from burnout, trying not to burn out, or are living with someone who is any of those other three. Because I can tell you, it's no picnic being married to someone who's burning out or is burned out. My wife will tell you that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So I'll do coaching along those lines. Or, a bit more upbeat, it's people who just like to feel a bit more confident in the manner with which they're going about their business. So, confidence coaching. What's on your plate? I'll help you unpick that. I'll help you find the right answers for you to navigate whatever you need to do going forward. So that's more traditional, and sometimes that morphs slightly into a bit of mentoring, but only if I have direct experience in whatever it is that they're doing. So. And
how does that work? Is that like do you do like weekly sessions, or is it one-offs? Is it set courses?
I don't do one-offs because the actual work happens between sessions, not in them. The sessions are to help people calm, get some clarity, get some understanding, reflect on their situation, and build a strategy as to how they're going to attack whatever it is. But then they've got to do it.
Yeah.
And then we're going to loop back and go, how'd you get on?
Yeah.
Because you don't always get the right strategy straight away. In fact, you're more likely not to.
Yeah.
So you need 2 or 3 sessions just to go, okay, we had plan A, how did plan A pan out?
Yeah.
And about half the time people go, oh, I was full of intention, but actually I was being a bit ambitious with this and that. So I didn't do it for various reasons. I'm like, nothing wrong with that. Just means we need to change the plan.
Yeah.
So now that we know that, what you can and can't do in reality, how does that affect your plan? Let's come up with a new plan, then they'll go ahead and do it. Then we'll have another session to go, how'd that go? And we'll iterate. And maybe 4 or 6 sessions later, people are like, I'm on track.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Sounds
See you
good.
in 6 months. So I don't do individuals, but I'll always have a chat with someone.
Yeah.
Always have a chat. If anybody goes, that's interesting what you're saying, I'd love to have a chat. I've had hundreds of chats and they are brilliant.
Yeah.
I've met the most amazing, well, we have a lovely chat today. And I'll have hundreds more. So, but I wouldn't even call that a session, I just do that for free.
Yeah.
Because it's all got to start, nothing happens without a chat.
That's true.
So let's just have a chat. If we feel like there's something to explore, brilliant. Let's explore it. If we feel like there isn't, doesn't matter. We had a lovely chat.
So that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's people, interactions. Oh man, this has been a pleasure. So yeah, I hope everyone watching takes you up on that offer, reaches out. For me, it's been really, really, really insightful. So thank you so much for this, James.
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate it.
Thanks for setting it up. And listen, you've got some weeding to do, so we
I
need
do.
to...
Yeah. Oh man, I thought you was gonna forget about that. Is this not enough? All right, cool.